Welcome back everyone to the Definitive Guide series on running Strapi on Google Cloud Platform. If you're just joining me, be sure to check out part 1 where we set up our Google Cloud environment. I'm Kevin Blanco, Senior Developer Relations Advocate, and I'm also a Google Developer Expert in Google Cloud. In part 1, we configured everything we need to have in GCP for the Strapi deployment. Now, in part 2, we're going to deep dive into developing the Strapi application itself for Google Cloud. We'll cover everything from setting up the Strapi application to securing it, connecting it to the Google Cloud SQL, and managing media files with Google Cloud Storage. So without further ado, let's get started. Alright, let's build the Strapi application. Here I am in Visual Studio Code and I have also my terminal ready because you need to have node.js at least version 18 to run Strapi. Now I have, let's see, version 20 I think, so yeah, I'm ready to start working on it. So the first thing we're going to do in order to install or create our Strapi application is use npx. That actually downloads and scaffolds the projects, create Strapi app at the latest version, and then let's give it a name. I'm gonna call it Strapi Google Cloud. And this is going to actually bring all the dependencies and, like I said, scaffold the whole project for us, super easy. Which installation type? I will always recommend the Kickstart, but you can create your custom settings as your need. So I'm gonna choose Kickstart. And like I said, this is going to bring all the dependencies and create the Strapi application. Now this might take some time, so I'm going to speed up the video and until it's completely done. Alright, it's done, and actually we can see that the folder has been created and all the scaffold is done. We can see some information about the project, like the version of Strapi we're using. Right now is 4.20 as I'm doing this video with the version 20 of Node.js. And locally, normally Strapi uses SQLite databases, but in production, remember that in first video we created a Postgres database instance for that environment. Also, one thing we can see is that it generated automatically the service to run on localhost port 1337/admin. So let's actually go to the browser and configure the first administrative user. All right, let's create our first administrative user. This is going to be like the user 0, the user admin. So let's give it a name. I'm going to call it Kevin Blanco, which is my name. I'm going to put my email. It's going to be my personal email. And then whatever password I want. I'm going to do a super secure password, admin123. And actually not the 4. And now let's start using Strapi. So the first thing you will notice on the left is that you have some information about Strapi. The first one is the content manager. Here you will pretty much manage and create all of your content. It has filtering, search, sorting, etc. Then the content type builder. Here you can visually create your different data models, field, relationships, and behavior. Then you have the media library where you can control all of your media assets like images, videos, etc. And then you will find plugins and marketplace and also the settings of your application. Now, if you're watching this video, you probably already know a little bit about Strapi. So I'm not going to go into details about the actual Strapi, what it is, because we want to deploy to Google Cloud. But let's go back to the actual code editor and continue to develop and configure our application to deploy to Google Cloud Platform. There are a couple of important commands you're going to need to know about Strapi. The first one is Strapi run build, and this is going to actually build our application. So if we install, for example, new plugins and configure it, we have to rerun the build process. And the other one is npm run develop. This is actually going to start our application in watch mode so we can make changes, and it's actually going to set up the browser application that we just saw a second ago. So let's stop this and add our package for Postgres, because remember that we're going to need to use Postgres in Google Cloud Platform. So let's just install the standard Postgres package for Node.js, and let's use that in our configuration. So Strapi stores everything configuration-wise in this config folder. Now, for example, everything related to the database is going to be in the database file, plugins, etc. But if you want to have different configuration per environments, you need to create a folder for each of the environments you want to have configuration. So let's actually create a new folder here, and it's going to call it env. Then let's create another folder, and this one we're going to call production. And there we will create a new file called database.js. So in this file, we're going to have the configuration for the database for the production environment. It's going to be completely different for any of the other environments. And in this configuration, what we're going to have is the connection to our Postgres environment, because remember that in Google Cloud, we're going to be using the Postgres connection. So the host, this is something that basically we're going to be passing environment variables from our app YAML we will create in just a minute. The database name, the user, and the password, they all are going to come from environment variables, so we can keep it secure. Now let's do the same for the cloud storage connection. Turns out that Strapi doesn't really have a built-in connector for Google Cloud Platform, so we're going to be using a community package called Strapi Provider Upload Google Cloud Storage. So the way we install it is, just like any other npm package, the name is Strapi Community / Strapi Provider Upload Google Cloud Storage, and we save it in our package.json. Remember, all of these commands are available in the supporting documentation that you can find in the link in the description. Now let's also configure this for our production plugins. Remember, we just created the database. Now let's create another file, and this one we're gonna call plugins.js. And this one again is going to have the plugin configuration for production. Now, if we don't define anything in this file, we're going to be using any default configuration available in the config in the plugins.js in the root of the config, but any overrides will happen per environment. So this one is very simple. It has the upload configuration, which uses the package we just installed, and we're going to pass some parameters. The first one is the bucket name, again passing from environment variables, the base path, which is going to be as well from environment variables, and here we have two important configuration. The first one is the public files. Remember that in the first video we defined the files to be public, but if this is not going to be your case, here you will change it to false, and Strapi and this package will create signed objects. But if you keep it public, it's not going to create any type of signature for the objects. In my case, I'm going to keep it public, and then the uniform. Remember that we have two options for the bucket. One is uniform or fine-grained for the ACL. If you define uniform, then this will be true. But in our case, remember, we set it up as ACL, so each object has different properties. So in this case, we're going to be using uniform as false because it's not going to be uniform. But that's really important to keep in mind here. So let's save that file, and let's make another change. Now that we have the plugins, the databases, now we need to make a change also in the configuration in the middlewares. Here in the middlewares, we just have information about Strapi middlewares. We're not going to be creating our own middleware, but we're going to be changing the security middleware, which is this one right here, because we need to tell Strapi that it's safe to load any file that comes from storage.googleapis.com. So what I just did is replacing the security line with this object right here. Again, this documentation is in the link in the description. What is changing is basically passing a custom configuration for the content security policy. And we're going to pass on directive, so any image or media that comes from storage.googleapis.com, it can be set it up as, secure from a Strapi security middleware standpoint. So that way the images will actually load in our CMS. So that's it for the middlewares. Let's save that file and we should be good to go in this area. Now let's configure the file for App Engine. Turns out that App Engine requires a YAML definition file, and there's where we're going to define the environment variables, the configuration of the runtime, etc. We're going to call it app.yaml, and we're going to place it in the root of our Strapi application. And here we're going to define all of the information about our application. So let me show you what I have here. So the first thing is going to be the runtime. runtime is going to be the version of Node.js or any other runtime that we want to use, because App Engine supports Python, Java, and many others. I'm going to set it up not actually to Node 18, but actually Node 20. And then the instance class, this is just a definition or a configuration of memory and CPU. F2 is like the most basic one. And I'm going to be using that one because this is just for testing and I don't want to have like a big billing on my App Engine. And then the environment variables. Here we define all the variables that we're going to need in our application. Remember that we set it up the database name, the database user, password, and the instance connection name. That's going to be used for the Cloud SQL connection, and then the bucket name and the bucket path for the cloud storage. So let's actually change these values here in the in here, because I'm going to be putting my actual password and my actual connection name. Remember the password we created on the first video? This is where you're going to put it. Remember the instance connection name we saw on the Cloud SQL in the first video? Here's where you put it. Remember the bucket that we created in the first video? That's the name of the bucket. You're going to put it over there. And then the base path, you can define whatever you want, but I normally like to put all of the files that relates to the CMS on a given folder in the bucket. So I'm going to change this right now. Okay, I just replaced it with my values. I really don't care if you see the password, because this is going to be remembered that via the service account, so there's no way you can actually connect to this instance. So there you go. That should be it, what we need in terms of the environment variables. Now we need to tell Google Cloud what command is going to be run when we deploy to App Engine. And the way we do that is on the configuration of our package in the package JSON file. And we need to define a new script in the scripts objects here for Google Cloud. And the name of that command is defined via gcp-build name. So this is the name of the build that actually App Engine is going to look for to execute when we deploy our application. And what we need to run is a Strapi build. So whenever we deploy our app to App Engine, Google App Engine will find this command and will run it. And this actually is a Strapi build. So it's going to build their Strapi app and run it on App Engine. Now, one last little change we need to make is to define our gcloud ignore file. Very similar to the git ignore file, this is some folders and files we want to tell Google Cloud to ignore when we deploy. Because, for example, we don't want to deploy the node modules and other files that we don't really need. So let's create a new file called gcloud ignore. And in this file, we're going to be putting what we want to ignore in Google Cloud. So obviously we want to ignore the file itself, anything that's .git ignore, the node modules, and also whatever is included in the git ignore, any .env file, because we're going to be passing the environment variables via the App Engine and not via the .env file. That .env file is usually used locally. And then yarn log in case we're using yarn, but we're not using yarn, so we should be good to go. So in theory, this is all we need to do to deploy our application to Strapi. Just a recap, we created the configuration for the database, the configuration for Strapi, cloud storage, the app.yaml to define all of our environment variables, the change of the security middleware, and now the gcloud ignore file. So we should be good to go to deploy our application. So to deploy to App Engine, all we have to do is use the gcloud app deploy command. Remember I mentioned at the beginning that you should have gcloud command line interface installed in your machine to do this. So in case you haven't, find the link in the description to install it and you should be able to start doing it. Make sure you are in the right project by running gcloud config set project and the name of your project. In my case, Kevin Blanco -appsmith, that's the name of my project. In case you have multiple projects, this is important to run because we might deploy to another project actually. So now let's actually deploy it. In the root of our Strapi project, let's run gcloud app deploy and then the name of the YAML file we created. Remember we name it app.yaml and then the project flagged. Here we tell to which project we want to deploy this application. So remember my name is Kevin Blanco -appsmith. And that should be it. So once we run it, what gcloud is going to do is read our app YAML configuration, understand all of the files that we have in our project, and start a deployment procedure. So we want to confirm it, say yes, and this might take some time, mostly on the first one, because we have to upload all of the files to the actual bucket for App Engine and then App Engine to be configured. So let's actually speed up to the end of that procedure. All right, the deployment is done and I'm super excited to go to the browser and actually give it a try. We could actually just click on the link here because it is the URL of our Strapi application, but let's actually go to App Engine and review how it looks from there. From our search console, we can find App Engine in Google Cloud Platform, and we will see some information about our application. So the first thing is the URL. You see it on the right, and we can see some summary, or we will be able to see some summary about usage and utilization and which pages are getting more load, etc. in our App Engine application. Now, if you have errors on your deployment, you can also see the application errors, server errors, and client errors here. So you can actually understand what's going on. Also on versions, every time you deploy a new application to App Engine, there's going to create different versions. You can give it a name to these versions, or App Engine will actually use the date and the hour of that deployment as the name of the version. So right now we are serving 100% of our traffic to this instance version, which doesn't have really any running instance because nobody is actually visiting it. So if you deploy another version, you can actually split traffic and do a lot of cool stuff in Google App Engine, but that's out of this equation for now. So let's actually go to the dashboard, click on the button, and there you go. Strapi is running with no problem at first. So if we go to /admin, we should be able to create the admin user again. So you might wonder why again? Well, because we created our admin user in our local database, our Postgres, sorry, our SQLite database in our local machine. So now that Strapi is deployed and actually using the connection string to the Postgres database in cloud storage, since there are no users and no information there, we will have to create the admin user in this instance again. And there you go. It's working fine. This is perfect. We just deployed it. It works perfectly. Now, in case you don't want to go over all of the steps we just did, this code base is already running in GitHub, in my public GitHub repository, so you can just fork it or clone it yourself, so you don't have to do everything from scratch. You will find all the configuration is already there. You just change the environment variables to your desired environment variables, and you should be able to actually deploy your application. So there you go. It's working fine on Google App Engine. Alright, you just witnessed how easy it is to configure Strapi to run on Google Cloud Platform. Now let's go to the third video and find out on how to set up deployments and automated checks with Google Cloud Build. Be sure to subscribe to my channel for more tutorials like this, and I see you on the next video.